to the Iris House Women as the Face of AIDS Summit. Hopefully you were able to take a quick break. Okay, so Nala is here. She's logged in as Nala, Simone. Thank you. So our next group of panelists is going to be a great talk around from our summit theme, as we originally started out, across the lifespan from prevention to aging. And we have a really good dear friend of mine, a former Iris House board member who is now with Gilead Sciences, who agreed to moderate today's session and panel for us. Many of you have heard Dr. Gina Brown speak. She's spoken at our summit many years on giving our update around women and girls and HIV. Dr. Brown has expertise around particularly maternal health, women, HIV, and how we help to make sure that we get women to the end of this epidemic. So I knew that she would be a key person to help facilitate this conversation with our wonderful panelists. So Oren, Nala is Nala Simone. So Nala, you can also share and turn on your camera when you're ready. And I welcome Dr. Gina Brown, who will introduce the afternoon panel across the lifespan from prevention to aging. Gina, if you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and I am to be back with my friends at Iris House. I don't know if you can see me. I'm going to share my screen and bring up some slides, but I am just really thrilled to be here to talk about the issues of HIV in women with this wonderful group of women who the goal of this panel is for them to talk to you about the issues of HIV in women from a variety of backgrounds and from across the country. But I also have to just lay hands and clap and say thank you to Kamara Jones. That was the most amazing, amazing breakdown and understanding of the issues of race, racism, and how they are so structurally a part of our world and our country and our everydays that we function, but also to provide us with some really concrete ways to think about how to get through this and get around this and see a future for not living in this kind of a world. So thank you, Kamara. So we have 4 really wonderful and dynamic women. I'm just going to set the stage for a second, which is, you know, we're in this place of trying to end the HIV epidemic, and we have this Ending the HIV Epidemic, a plan for America. And I just need to make note that this plan for America isn't the first plan, it's actually the third. We had 2 that built upon each other coming through the last administration and the previous administration. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to deal with, there's a chat that came across, but I can't see what it says. Anyway, and so we're now in the middle of this plan. And what's important about this plan is it identified the 48 highest burden counties, added Washington, D.C., San Juan, Puerto Rico, and then 7 states with a substantial rural burden of HIV. But I want you to look at New York, and with that comes money and comes programming. So if you look at New York, you can see this area right around New York, the counties right outside of New York City and Long Island that are a real concentration for the different counties that are their efforts being put forth for this Ending the Epidemic Plan for America, which starts with diagnosing people as early as possible, treating with people with HIV as rapidly and as effectively as possible, preventing new HIV transmissions, and including the use of PrEP and then syringe exchange programs, and then responding quickly to any new outbreaks. I want you to keep this in mind as well. As we look at HIV across the lifespan, people living with HIV run the lifespan. More than 50% are people over the age of 50, so we can't forget, and some of these are people aging up. But if you look at incidents, which are new infections, you can see that many of these are people who are now acquiring HIV over the age of 50, so we can't forget. And then the last thing is we need to think about this in a very status neutral way. We do HIV testing, which should be part of everybody's care. If you're positive, you want to link the care, you want them retained in care, and you want to work at viral suppression as part of ending the epidemic. If you can keep a viral load undetectable, the risk of transmitting the virus to the person's sexual partner is virtually non-existent. If the person's someone who's not living with HIV, considered to be a person who might be at risk of HIV, and that's in all of our communities that we're talking about, We want to link them to care and work with them with HIV risk reduction, providing pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP, and then also doing HIV and other sexually transmitted infection testing and treatment when they turn out to have an STI or when you see them end up as someone who's living with HIV. This is how we will end the epidemic. But we won't really end this epidemic unless we can address the issues of women. And I think we have now the opportunity to do this with our really wonderful panel of women who will come and talk with us. Some of these are folks that you know. Some of these are folks who will bring us a somewhat newer perspective. I want to introduce Connie Johnson. Can you raise your hand? And Connie's going to talk with us about from the perspective of a woman of a certain age, but also a woman from the South. And as you heard earlier this morning, the South has 50% of the new HIV diagnoses. But what didn't get said is the South is only 38% of the US population. That's important. Less of our population, but more of the diagnoses. Raven, you have to come back, but I'll save and introduce you last. Thank you. Many of us know Raven. We know her mom, Michelle Lopez. Raven is a young woman who was born with HIV. She was born before the time we had the ability to prevent mother-to-child transmission. So she was considered a child of perinatal transmission. But she's now no longer a child. Raven is a woman, a young woman, and making me feel like an old woman because I realize you're almost 30 years old and I knew you before you existed. And she's also now a mother. She has a 4-year-old who is not a young child living with HIV, for whom reduction of perinatal transmission worked. And she also has a partner who is her child's father, who is also someone who's not living with HIV. And so some of the issues we're going to ask Raven about are just being a younger person, not living with HIV, and for all of the women, these issues of dating and disclosure. And then one of the things she says in her bio is that HIV is not the main thing in her life. She controls HIV, it does not control her life. And I suspect that's true for all of the women we're working with, we're seeing today. Waheedah El-Shabazz is a woman who calls herself someone aging with HIV, although I suspect it's just a woman of experience with HIV. And she's also a Muslim woman who's done work in the Muslim community around HIV issues. And she's going to talk with us about that perspective, but also as a woman of a certain age and certain experience who's living with HIV. And Nala Simone is a woman living with HIV also, who has worked with the LGBT community, has done a lot of her work around HIV in that community, and will talk to us about her experiences there as well. And so what I'd like to do is start off with a couple of questions. I'll start off first with Connie. Can you, as a woman from the South, can you talk a bit about the experiences of stigma in the South, and as people become more informed about HIV in the South, what that has meant for you?
Hello, everybody.
I'm going to ask each person to talk just a little bit because we have a few questions we want to get in, and then we also want to leave some room for questions from the audience at the end.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to be here and so excited to have heard all of the speakers that have come before. I guess just to give you a little bit of an idea of what my experience is in the South. I am a woman living with HIV. I was diagnosed in 2002. 7 years prior, my mother died of AIDS complications. She died at 44. I just turned 44. So when I was diagnosed, one of my goals was to outlive my mother. So here we are, I'm at the same age now that she passed away. So this was, the early 90s. So stigma in the South is still an issue. There are many, many women who will not disclose, who will not come, will not come forward because stigma is a thing. I honestly had never really experienced much stigma since I've been vocal about it and speaking about living with HIV for about 10 years now. But it wasn't until I moved back to my hometown that I actually experienced any real stigma. Something as simple as, I'll be honest, being at church wanting to cook in the kitchen and that knowledge being known and being in a very subtle but known way that I was not welcomed in that space. And so that's a personal experience that and so it is very much so a valid, it's a valid issue here in the South. I think partially because there's still a lot of myths about HIV and AIDS, you know, and how it is contracted. I think it is also stemming from, I guess, just an unresolved issue with the origins of HIV AIDS and how it developed coming, you know. And so those things are really valid. And I'll add that my mother did not disclose to anyone. By the time she was able to tell anybody, she had to tell everybody. So she told my sister and I because she had to. By the time her brothers and sisters knew, they were coming to her funeral. So that's just how deeply embedded the stigma around HIV/AIDS is still in the South. Is it getting better? I would say so. I would say yes. I would say that that there is more conversation. The conversation is more welcome in public spaces. The conversation is more accepted in schools because they understand, there's an understanding that we want to protect young people, and it's a conversation that needs to happen among young people. So there is this kind of chipping away at stigma that's happening in the South. But my concern is that chipping away happening fast enough, and is it happening in a way that's widespread? So that's my experience.
Raven, so you grew up with everybody knowing your status.
Yes.
And never having an opportunity to disclose on your own timeline or or having control over the disclosure. Was there stigma related to that? And was there stigma related to you being a mother, trying to be a mother who is a woman living with HIV in this late stage? Did you still?
Yes, even I dealt with stigma all my life. I always tell everyone I never had a normal childhood because I always got stigmatized. And this one incident that's just like, I'm getting over it, but God is just making me get over it. But in the 9th grade, freshman year of high school, this one kid, he noticed me, and he pulled out an ad from a Pause magazine and went around the whole high school and told everyone, like, oh, no one talks to Raven because she has the monster. And that day, I didn't know what was going on. Everyone was acting funny towards me. And when I got up to the lunchroom, I couldn't go into the lunchroom, and everyone was like outside the lunchroom. And my friend, she turned to me, she's like, everyone knows. And I'm like, what do you mean everyone knows? And there was like a poster of me, like I had like little monsters like around my head. Like it was just an ugly poster of me. And
Jesus, kids work fast.
And yeah, and they started throwing food at me. They was like, Raven, you're gonna die, like, and I'm like, here am I. I'm in the 9th grade, and I'm just like, you would figure they have health education, okay, HIV, but as I said, I feel like HIV needs to be more of a topic in school, because HIV is just a day in school. You learn about it and that's it. But you have to expand on it. And then it was just like, even when I got pregnant, when I had Royal in the hospital, a nurse, I had problems of feeding Royal. You can't breastfeed your child. And one of the nurses was like, why are you not breastfeeding your child? And, I just had a baby, and, my emotions is everywhere. And I'm like, she didn't read my chart. She don't know that I'm positive. Why does she want me to breastfeed my child? And I just had like a nervous breakdown. I called my mom, and I'm like, Ma, she wants me to breastfeed my child because they wasn't giving me enough milk for Royal, for my son. That's my son's name. And I just was like, in a panic state, I'm like, wow, she don't even realize that she's dealing with a person that was born with HIV, and she wants me to breastfeed my child. And it was just like a big chaos in the hospital, because I just was just like, wow, this is just a lack of knowledge that, here's a nurse. She probably just took her job as, however, oh, I'm in labor and delivery. Let me just go do what I got to do. You have to read people charts. You have to know people. So, and I'm
and you're also assuming she understood that, like, she would even know, like she needs not just to read the chart, but she needs the information to know that that's not necessarily the safest thing to do in the United
And
States.
and while we there, she's looking at me and she's expecting an answer from me. She's like, why you're not breastfeeding your son? And I'm looking at her, I'm like, Miss, are you seriously asking me why I'm not breastfeeding my son right now? And she just walks out the room, and I just broke down because my son is hungry and I didn't know what to do. And I was just like, wow, Raven, we still in 2016 and there's some people out here that still don't know.
Did people give you a hard time at all about getting pregnant or trying to have a baby?
No, not at all. To tell you the honest truth, when I got pregnant, a lot of people were surprised because people think just because you're positive, you can't have a kid, or they scared of, oh, my kid might get it, my child might get it. And as I always say that, I live my life as any other person, any other human. So that, but when I got pregnant, I did have to take extra protocol. I was high risk pregnancy, and I did what I had to do. I take my medicine like any other, take my prenatal vitamins, did my prenatal follow-ups. So it was just like any human. And I tell everyone that's positive or that wants to become a mom, just, talk to your doctor. Learn about it. Learn about it. Don't be scared, because at the end of the day, we are all human. We are all human.
So I'm going to go to Waheedah next, but I'm going to make a correction. I said Nala was a woman living with HIV, and she is not. I'm going to ask Waheedah to talk a bit about the issues of stigma working in both living as part of the Muslim community, but also some of the other work that she does with the LGBTQ community. Can she talk about the issues of stigma there? First to Waheedah, and then I'll ask Nala to talk about it.
And thank you, Dr. Brown. And thank you, Iris House, for putting this summit on, Ingrid and Kimberly and all my girls there in New York. Hey, little horse. Yeah, so I was diagnosed in 2003. And when I shared I'm 67 now. I converted to Islam when I was 19. So I've been Muslim most of my life. So in 2003, when I got diagnosed with AIDS, I told a few of the Muslim women at the mosque about my diagnosis. I was expecting some kind of support and that sort of thing. But what I got was totally different. I don't know how many of you know about what we do in the mosque, but the mosque, we take our shoes off when we enter the mosque because we pray on the floor. We put our head to the floor. So the rug is always supposed to be clean and a sacred, clean space. I remember those women asking me that I think that I should be able to enter the mosque because I had HIV. Did I think that I was suitable to be praying, quote unquote, on the rug? And that went through me.
I was going to say, that's an implication that you're not clean.
That went through me because, like I said, I've been praying on the rug since I was 19. And now I'm 50 years old, and now you're telling me I'm not suitable. Where am I supposed to pray? And so for a while, I just stopped going to the mosque, and thank God the LGBT community was there to break my fall, because I felt like I was really alone. I really felt alone and isolated. LGBT community here in Philadelphia supported me and taught me how to live in my own truth, right? And so I learned how to do that. But let me just go fast forward. About 8 years ago, I just moved where I am now. There's a mosque not far from me. And I said, I'm going to go to this mosque, but I'm going to keep my mouth quiet. I'm not going to go in talking about I'm an activist or anything. So I went in and I was there for a couple of years. And then my husband went on the news on World AIDS Day to do an interview. He's also a person living with HIV. It was his interview, but because I was there, they said, oh, come on over here, Miss Waheedah. So my husband and I sat there and we did this interview on World AIDS Day about aging with HIV. So when I got back to this mosque around the corner, and it was a couple of months later, one of the women said to me, I saw you and your husband on television. I said, oh, really? I said to myself, here it comes.
And did she whisper it like that?
Yeah, she whispered, I saw you and your husband on the television. And then she said, I knew something was special about you the day you walked in here. Totally different. It wasn't what I expected, but it took 12 years. It was a difference between 12. It was a difference, but and I felt good. She said to keep up the good work.
Okay.
Right? And so now that I know that she knows, I know everybody there knows that I'm the girl, that was on television. So generally, I don't believe that things have changed, but I think it's on the individual basis, right? We're told in Islam not to tell your business, not to go public. Some people tell me I should be quiet, and those sort of things, right? But there are so many Muslims living with HIV. We don't have the numbers, but we can extrapolate from the Black communities. We can extrapolate where the mosques are. Most of the time, we live and pray in the same neighborhood. So where we live is where we play, is where we stay, is where we pray, right? And so if you kind of transpose the high areas hit by HIV over top of those same areas where there are mosques, some people with HIV are attending all of these mosques. So I'm very sorry to hear that Raven and Connie, what you all went through, right? But we all face the same dilemma when it comes to HIV. And so now I'm living in my truth. I am a Muslim living with HIV, right? And I'm living on purpose. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to serve. I'm going to do I feel like I'm going to do this service that God intended for me to do. And I'm going to continue sharing my status, because I don't disclose my status anymore because it's not a secret. It is my status to share.
That's right.
I'm going to continue to share. Thank you, Raven. I'm going to continue to share my status. I'm going to continue to do this work.
Okay. Nala, you work closely with the LGBTQ community working in and around the issues of HIV. Can you talk about the stigma that you've seen both for members of the community, but also just working in this space of HIV?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And thank you for reintroducing me, Gina. I really appreciate it. Through my experience as it pertains to stigma, most of my work has started with youth. I got into this work around 2000, I believe, 13, 14, and it was really around research. And in my lived experience as being a trans woman, what I will often see is like my siblings be going through so many different elements or challenges of life, whether it goes from homelessness, whether it goes from not being able to eat. And I found myself, finding community within there. And I think a lot of the conversations that has happened around HIV transmission was around, the ways in which hormones, right, black market, so to speak, and not really getting access to healthcare as itself. And some of the stigma around is around whether we'll find love or not, right? Whether we can be in spaces. I think a lot of it around quality of life as it pertains to the lived experience of trans women particularly is where can we show up in spaces that we get access to the quality of life and then quality of healthcare, right? In our intersecting identities, whether it be HIV positive, whether it be for our transness, whether it be for other health. But I think the stigma that tends to be in the forefront is really about how people perceive us, whether we matter or not, or whether we don't matter. There's a conversation if our life existence matter and if we're just supposed to be in spaces, if health care physicians should treat us. There's always a stigma around trans women all being HIV positive. That's another stigma that we experience. There is always a stigma around the mattering, but that cleanse, I heard the conversation from Shabazz as you talked about the cleansiness, that there's a stigma around trans women not being clean, or like, well, if trans women exist, what are they doing with their lives, right? And how they're utilizing their bodies. And so the stigma goes on and on and on and on around from substance use, from transmission, for so much. And I can expand more of, if you need me to, on what that actually like and what I've heard been said.
What I'd like for each of you to do is give me it's not a fair question to ask to get a shortish answer from, but how have you dealt with the stigma? How have you addressed it? And I'll start again with Connie, go to Raven, go to Waheedah, and go to Nala.
So, like I shared before, my mom didn't tell anybody that she had AIDS. And it was almost instant the moment I was diagnosed, I decided to start telling people. I said, I'm not going to live in silence. Like, I watched it destroy my mother. Like, pretty much, I really believe that a lot of what she died from was the stress of holding on to that information and holding on to that shame and guilt and, you know, the things that kind of come with sometimes with a diagnosis. And I said, I'm not going to do that to myself. I learned enough from watching her. And I said, I'm going to, I don't know what the response is going to be. I don't know what it's going to be, but I just know that in order for me to move forward and to live in truth, I'm going to have to be able to speak this thing. And so I started telling my family, and they rallied around me. And then I told the church that I was going to at the time, and they rallied around me. And I told a few more friends, and they rallied around me. So this growing community of people that was supporting me made it possible for me to be able to be as vocal as I am, to be able to write about it, and to, you know, just to be able to express myself freely as a woman living with HIV. So when this incident happened, you know, and it happened maybe a couple of years ago. So, and I've been doing this for, like I said, over 10 years. So when this incident happened at this church, I was just like, this doesn't happen to me. It was so foreign. The experience was so foreign, but what it did was it made me that much more empathetic to I call women living with HIV my blood sisters who don't have the kind of support, you know, that I was able to, that, you know, the people, you know, to rally around them. And so that's how I've been dealing. Like, I'm not here by myself. Like, I'm here because there are so many others who have rallied around me and who have created safety for me to be able to speak freely and be who I am. Now, and don't get me wrong, I thought about it, and because I've been living so freely and speaking so freely, I'm really candid about it. And so this one particular time I was, you know, applying for a job, and I'm signing the W-9 and, you know, doing all of the tax information and everything else. And all of a sudden, I tell the person who's hiring me, look, in full disclosure, I'm a person who lives with HIV, and all of a sudden the phone call stopped and I didn't get the job. So I've had that experience as well on a business side, you know, so that's a whole nother thing. But on a personal level and a community level, I've always had the support, and that's how I've been able to deal with it.
Okay. Raven?
I by taking a public stand and by not staying silent and by letting people know that, you know, I was born with this. I didn't ask for it. So I don't know what it's to feel like to be negative, to not have HIV. So my thing was just to, like, really educating my peers, basically, and letting them know that, you know what, like, this is me. This is who I am. I'm not ashamed of who I am. Everyone knows, or some people might know, who my mom is. Y'all know how strong she is, and she was.
Everybody knows who your mother is.
Yeah, so, you know, she was always a straightforward person with me. Like, that's one thing I thank God for her for. She was always like, listen, Raven, you did not ask for this. You was born with this. So you have to let people know that, you know what, I am human, and you don't have to accept me, but accept me for who I am. And that's what I always grew up on, saying, listen, either you're going to accept me for who I am, or there goes the door. Like, I don't have time for it. So that's my attitude.
Okay. Waheedah?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, it was the LGBT community that taught me how to live my truth. And so I educated myself so that when I decided to share my status with someone, I would have all of the facts to go right behind it. And I also learned that the way that I share it is the way they're going to receive it. If I say, oh my God, I have AIDS, they're going to say, oh my God, you have AIDS. So I learned that there was a way of sharing my status. Also, some people call me the Liz Taylor of HIV and AIDS. I've been married 3 times. And my second husband.
So we're going to get to that conversation before the end of this.
So when I got married the second time, I asked a woman of trans experience to be my maid of honor. So here was something special. Here's a Muslim living with HIV with a woman of trans experience as the maid of honor. But the thing was, she was my best friend. She was the one who did my intake, my assessment when I first came to the clinic. We became friends, and she mentored me and taught me so much stuff. There was no one else that I could ask to stand with me but her. And so I did that. But I also got connected with other Muslims who were living with HIV.
Okay.
And I had to do a world tour to do that because I had to go to Canada, had to go to South Africa. But I found these Muslims living with HIV, and I knew that I wasn't the only one. Mm-hmm. And so right now I actually attend a LGBT affirming mosque that is in Canada through Zoom and stuff like that. But it's a LGBT affirming. It's a mosque for what they call marginalized Muslims, and I kind of like feel like, you know, that's me because I have HIV. And I've also got connected with Rahma in Washington, D.C., reaching all Muslims with HIV in America, which is an advocacy group that I've begun to work with. And so my advocacy continues. So, yeah, so, and as long as I have people, as long as I have these folks, you know, this HIV is the one thing. There's a lot of things I can't do by myself. HIV is one of them. So because I have built this, I have this community, I'm blessed to have this community. People living with HIV, I can access it anytime we pray together. You know, and we have our annual retreats together where we meet Muslims all around the country. We come to DC once a year through Rahma, and we have our annual retreats and those sort of things. So that kind of keeps me going. So sometimes
I'm listening to the three of you, sorry to interrupt, of women who are living with HIV, and it sounds like one, being straightforward, owning your truth.
Yes.
Developing a community that supports you and not trying to be, you know, and the rest of them get kind of kicked to the curb, it sounds like. Nala, you're working on the outside of this, not a woman living with HIV, but you're working with individuals who are living with HIV. How do you work with them around addressing the issues of their stigma?
Yeah, I think
stigma directed to them and internal stigma.
I have this motto of always, not often, putting labor on people who are experiencing pain. And so I often talk about what the work that's required of me as someone who's HIV negative, because we're talking about community, we're talking about siblinghood. So I often feel like it's my duty to start with, because I'm first generation American, you know, my mom is from Jamaica. And so there's always stigma around that, right? Around health, HIV, and in the Caribbean. And so I started with addressing it with my parents and my mom and my grandma and my brother, and having those conversations. And that's an ongoing conversation, because undoing what you've been taught for so long about our interactions within the community of Blackness across the African diaspora as it pertains to HIV is a work that is ongoing to undoing that stigma, so that we can show up in spaces and be seen and really have empathy. I think my level in terms of work, but I want to go more of an intimate with my friends, you know. As I was getting into the work of research, a close friend of mine was, diagnosed with HIV. That was the first experience. And that was my first experience actually seeing the walk of them getting the result, breaking down and crying and holding space, and then seeing them go through the experience of not feeling like, you know, life was going to get any better, and walking through that experience like, I am here with you. What is it that you need of me to show up to remind you of who you are, despite of what a status is? Status doesn't change who you are. And I think there's a stigma about what the life expectancy looks like. And so reminding that person that we can get through this together. And so that was I share that story because it's important for me to share the intimate part, and then I can share about the work part and what that looks like.
You also earlier talked about the assumption that as a woman of trans experience that you must have HIV.
Mm-hmm.
Or you must be, you didn't say it, but you implied it. Yeah. A woman uses commercial sex as a way to make a living. Mm-hmm. You know, sort of the many ways that you can be othered seem to be all at the same time. How do you sort of manage those issues of stigma that come at you, which aren't even owning who you are as a person?
I manage it as it
comes. I'm saying it badly, but.
Yeah, no, I manage it as it comes. I think I could share another way of intimacy and intimate, like especially dating that may be a thing. The minute that I do disclose that I am trans, automatically what is being conflated is HIV. And so the question of being clean, or do you have STIs, all of that starts arising into one thing. I don't then get looked at as a human. I don't get looked at and held as empathy and grace and gentleness and care. It's more of aggression and hammering of interrogation of questions and questions and questions. And so what I navigate in those spaces is saying, I see that you have questions, and a lot of the questions that you are asking are also a reaction to what you know. And I really encourage you to undo what you know. Here's some resources. Good luck.
Okay. So you brought up dating. I'd like for each of you to address the dating issue, dating, disclosure. Nala, for you, it's a different disclosure, but how to address this dating disclosure issue? But we'll do the same circle. Connie, Raven, Waheedah, and then Nala again.
So dating, yeah, that's a thing. So.
And I won't even say it like in the time of COVID, just.
Yeah, well, yeah, so in the time of COVID, but just like period. So I can say that I have had an unhealthy relationship with sex and men from a teenager. Experienced several sexual traumas in my early life. And once I was diagnosed with HIV, it really made me look at sex and relationships in a very different light. Because honestly, I was sharing my body without connection, without really understanding that it was more than just a physical act. Like, this is a spiritual act. This is something, this is something that is bonding me to another person. And a few years after that, I decided that I was going to abstain from sexual contact for the sake of wanting a life partner, And so that has been my mission for the last 14 years. And you add the fact that you're not having sex and the fact that you're HIV positive, the pool of eligible bachelors, like, it shrinks. And so I have not like seriously dated anyone. What I have experienced is that once I disclose my my status, one of two things usually happens. One, either the other person is almost honored that I felt comfortable enough to share it, and they celebrate my honesty, because they're almost like, if she won't lie to me about this, she won't lie to me about anything else. So there's a kind of an honor and a trust that's built there. Or they get gone, which is fine, because what I want to be able to do is to give you the option. Like, if that's just not something that you can deal with, then that is fine. And I don't hold anything against it. Run along, do what you do. So I have this thing I also call HIV bum repellent. So it's like, if that's something you like, so you're not here for me, I get the feeling that if you see me, all of who I am, then you accept all of who I am. And if that's not within, something that you're wanting to do, then it's fine. Like I said, go.
I'm gonna have Raven speak up next too, because we have to leave time for other.
Okay, I'm sorry.
From the audience.
Raven? I'll leave it there.
Well, with my dating life, going to therapy and stuff, I had to build that I'm okay with rejection. So I could say that, I dealt with some no's, and I was okay with that, because what I say, due to royals, I'm sorry, due to, educating myself, I don't want people to feel like, I didn't want to feel like, okay, he don't want to be with me because of HIV, but it's a process for someone to understand that. So my dating life, I was always straightforward. I was like, listen, before we get sexually active or before anything, you need to know that I'm HIV positive. I always either get, I don't believe you, or you just don't want me to talk to you. And I always either let them Google my first and last name, or I just let them introduce them to my mom. And I'm like, Mom, can you please tell them that I have HIV? And she would And we'll be in the kitchen, and it would turn into a whole lesson into my house because they will really want to know the do's and the don'ts. And that's how my dating life is. It always been like, it's always, I had to educate the person, and they would just be like, okay, now it's it.
Waheedah?
I've had some experience dating because I get married. So I haven't dated. I've been married. Matter of fact, yesterday was my 10th year wedding anniversary to the husband I have now. But I have to say activism is sexy. That's what I found. And I remember the first time that I got a boyfriend after I was diagnosed with HIV was after I shared my status at a huge event. And the men just came running. I'm like, what is this? Seriously.
I may have to use that as that should be a t-shirt. Activism is sexy.
Activism is sexy. It's an attraction and it's sexy. And men like strong women, and it represents strength and things like that, right? But I also let them know that, okay, so because that we're here together and because I have this HIV thing, that doesn't mean I get 11 roses instead of 12. That doesn't mean that, I go to the movie, but I have to pick from the dollar menu. That's not what that means. I'm able to make myself very clear with that. And I remember once I was dating a negative person when I met the husband that I'm with now. And I told him I would have to cut the relationship off. He couldn't believe that a person living with HIV was going to cut off a relationship. Like I had that kind of power. I learned that I have choices, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I've done better. This is just me. I've done better being a person living with HIV, making better selections and making better choices than I did when I didn't have HIV. Everything's different. My world has changed, and I have some standards that we have. Like the standard of care. I have a standard of care. And so I let people know, I'm open enough to let people know that this is how it's going to go. You want to be with me? This is what I'm dealing with. This is how it's going to go. You're going to have to be kinder to me, gentler to me.
Thank you.
Patience with me because there's more to me.
Okay. Nala?
Yeah, that is, there's so many different ways it can go around disclosure as a trans woman, just my identity in itself. There's always this conversation about deception that I need to always have to navigate, because a guy assumes by me telling him that I'm trans that I'm either deceiving or that why didn't I know? It's like, well, what is your take on what trans looks like? Stop watching Jerry Springer. Go read the book again. Go start looking at other things and understand that out of blackness exists so many different things. Out of women come in different shapes and sizes. So I mean, navigating for me in terms of disclosure, I always have to figure out how much I want to tell this person. Is this person worthy of my truth? Right? And if after telling my truth, if that person is not for me, then that's okay, because rejection is God's protection for me. And I would rather want someone in my space and in my being and in my sacred space who's going to accept all of me, whatever may come. And I think that for me, in terms of disclosure around HIV, for those my friends have to go through extra layer of disclosure. It's like taking baby steps. And I've seen how that can be a struggle as well. So I've seen that as well.
So we're going to finish up with, do you guys talk to your partners or talk to yourselves about prevention? So now, do you address the issues of when you're looking for someone as a partner, do you address prevention within yourself? Raven, Connie, Waheedah, do you talk to your partners about how they can be prevented from getting HIV infection?
I definitely do. I also talk to a lot of my male friends and, my partner as well too about, I also talk to them about PrEP and PEP. And I push that about to them, and they, Raven, what is that? So I always, show them information, share information to them, and, let them know, this is the do's and don'ts of HIV and, what PrEP and PEP is. And so I'm very big on that. With my partner, I tell him, even though I'm undetectable, we still have to use condoms. He's like, but babe, you can't give it to me. But still, we still need to use condoms. I'm very sure on it.
Connie?
I always ask the question, when was the last time you were tested? And that tells me a lot about the person and how they, how they view themselves, honestly. And I've been pleased to find that a lot of people who I have, been in conversation with around that have been tested regularly or are being tested regularly. So that is something that I always ask the question about, is when was the last time you were tested?
Waheedah?
You have a few minutes left.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I like to make sure that my family members and people I come in contact with know about PrEP, that they know that there's a toolbox, that there's more ways to prevent HIV now, and encourage people to access PrEP. I tell them that any medical provider can write their prescription, or you can go to an HIV doctor if you choose, but you can go to your own primary physician and they can write you a prescription. But just let people know that there are ways that we can. I said it's like taking a vitamin. Just take it every day, and so that's pretty much what I'm doing, just pushing that PrEP.
And then Nala, how do you have conversations with partners about whether or not they're living with HIV, even though some of them may come with the assumption that you must have HIV even if you don't?
Yeah, that it's always a conversation. I think in one of my relationship, I was able to get on PrEP because my partner at the time was living with HIV, and so it's always a conversation for me, not just about HIV but also STIs, which is why, like, what does sex look like? How do we enjoy ourselves? What does pleasure look like? And keeping ourselves healthy. There's dental dam. There's so many different things about how you can access intimacy in a safe way that affirms your partner, not just talking about prevention, but also what feels safe for each and one of the persons. I think there's multiple conversation around prevention, not just around the steps, but how do you make each other feel affirmed? How do you make each other feel safe? What feels good together when you're in, or for some folks, for multiple and polyamorous relationships, what does that look like with each and every one of your partners or your person? It's really a conversation.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks for being so honest. I've got a bunch of take homes from this. You all own it, and people have to step up if they want to deal with you. You have standards. Rejection is your protection. There's a couple others that I have missed along the way, but we've got them in the chat. And so I want to thank you for just sending this positivity to other women who can own their lives as you have all chosen to own yours, and also learn how to protect themselves and protect their partners and live a full life. I'm going to open this up to some questions from people from the audience. If anyone has any to ask of them, you can type it into the chat box. And while they're typing, I will also thank you all for just being so incredibly strong and straightforward role models for all women about, we have standards and we can ask people to meet those standards. What I'm getting is thank you all for your wisdom, your candor, your grace, the power, for sharing. While we're waiting to see if anyone else has questions, I want to ask, so some of you are women, you guys run the age span, and you have younger women on the chat, and you have women of more experience on the chat. Do the women of more experience have anything to say to the women who are younger or of lesser experience? And do the women of lesser experience have anything to share with the women who've had more experience?
I like to go. And Dr. Brown, first you called us women of a certain age. And I like that, women of a certain age. But I did have some things I want to share with younger women, because I was told I may have to share something with Raven. This is not advice. This is just my experience, right? Live today. Live as though today is your last day. That means have fun. But also live as though you're going to live forever. Right?
Okay.
I always say that I'm a planner. If you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Always have a plan.
That's good advice for any woman of any age.
Yes, for anybody. Yeah. Do whatever you were going to do without HIV, you do it with HIV. People your age go to school, they go to college, they get a trade, so you can write your own ticket. So you can be, you can have your own economic justice, your own economic healing, right? Make sure that if you try to get a job that's going to have a 401k, because you're going to live to retirement now, right? So because now we're living into retirement. Years ago we sold our insurance policies and things like that. Make sure you have insurance. Make sure your parents and your partner has insurance. These are things that we just not need to be mindful about,
Okay.
and just pursue your dreams. And self-care also includes our own mental health as well. Self-care is just not physical care. It's also about our mental health. Depression is real.
I'm going to interrupt this with a question from the audience, and then come back to discussion in the other direction. Someone wants to know, is PrEP the only thing people are using to not spread HIV besides condoms? Any of you want to address that?
And other people can say it, but there's lots of ways to be intimate without actually even having penetration. So we have to think about that too. There are lots of ways without using barriers and without using PrEP. You don't always have to have penetration, to have intimacy. So just saying.
Yeah.
And there's also phone sex. That's the best. That's the safest sex you
In the
could
time
ever
of
have.
COVID.
We used to do that from an old head.
I've been asked that question to talk about sex in the time of COVID a couple of times, and people are really creative. And what is it? Even younger and older people really creative. So getting your creativity on is a useful thing.
And dating, yeah, all of that. Yeah, I echo what was said. I think definitely, again, going back to the conversations about what that looks like, because I know for folks that go on PrEP, sometimes, particularly, at the time when I was on PrEP, Truvada doesn't agree with everyone's body. So it's really taking the steps to plan. Like, everything's about planning and what does it look like, what will work, the time period, the window periods. If it's not PrEP, then it's something else. What is that? What if it's not condoms, then what else will work with you and the person? I think it's really a conversation with you and the provider as well. Like, I definitely think everyone should have a sexual provider when they're engaging with sex, period.
I love the concept of a sexual provider, someone you can have those conversations with. If Truvada's not working for men who have sex with men, for transgender women, there's also the opportunity to use Descovy, which gets around some of those side effects as well. Any direction from people who are newer to this? And actually, I can't even say newer, because Raven, you've been living with HIV as long as some of the women of a certain age have been living with HIV.
30 years, for 30 years. So, I just, I tell people I wasn't supposed to live until the age of 7. And by the grace of God, I'm 30. And I just tell people, like, I look at that as a big testimony. Like, I remember when my mom was in the hospital crying, fighting for me to live. And here am I now. Now she's a grandma. Now I'm taking care of a baby. So it's just like, I tell people, don't fall into what the myths and what you hear. Fight for your life. You fight for what you want, and you be who you want. And I never, as I said, I don't let HIV control me. I just do what I got to do and just live my life as any human.
Another question that says, since we're lacking health education in schools, how do we best reach young people around prevention and HIV awareness? And I think that's a question I think any of you can answer, because you've all worked with people across the age.
Can I be honest? Can I really be honest? The way to how we're going to get to these youth and young people is really social media and more. We need more younger faces, because, when I go to, when I do my speaking engagements, when I go to high schools, they always say, oh, we so used to seeing older people. We so used to, and the older people don't know what they're talking about. So when they see younger faces, they like, oh, snap, she looks just like me. And, so we need to start more for the high schools and schools. I think we need to start more narrowing it down to their identity, to let them know that, it could happen to you too. Because a lot of high school kids, and especially in high school, we have these high school kids that, they're experiencing things. So when we put a face to their face and they see that, oh, she's in my age bracket, she knows what she's talking about, she knows what's going on. Mm-hmm. So that's how I feel that in schools, it could get it could get to that. That's how the only way we could get to the youth is that we just put a face to their face. And also, I really feel like sex education should not just be one day in school. I don't know how school is, if it's different now, but I know that when HIV was taught in school, it was just like one day and that's it. And it was so many kids that, not because I was positive, I had so many other questions to ask, but you can't ask because your health teacher's like, well, I only know what they say on the book, and that's that.
Nala, how do you get to the younger folks that you work with?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so social media definitely helps. But what I've found successful is that in-person mock, like having activities that actually is a script. Like your partner comes out and tell you that they're HIV positive. How do you navigate that conversation? I think having a energy that is not of a somber energy, but really addressing some of the stigma, letting kids actually say the incorrect things and handling them with grace, and then inviting them what that looks like, definitely has been helpful. Because I think sometimes kids show up in spaces of trying to learn about sex, but they're also afraid because of how we shame the conversation about sex. And so they often don't even get to try on the conversation of sex being in their word, like saying the word penis or vagina and all those different things, like really warming them up in a space to have those conversations, and then moving into like, what does disclosure look like? What does conversation about intimacy looks like? What is conversation about consent? And then in like doing this work, what I have learned is that some of the kids that I work with haven't had the ability to have consent. Right. And so then I have to do work on like, what does consent looks like? Then what does navigating HIV looks like? What does navigating follow-ups after an issue looks like, such as PrEP? Like all these conversations are intertwined. So it's really just being in a space of creating a space where they can be open and free. I definitely agree with Raven. Sometimes having a younger space a younger face is helpful because it allows them to feel a little bit vulnerable, like as a peer-led. You definitely want to have people that look like who you're talking to.
So the last question is coming from LG Stylo 3, and I can't tell who that is. If you can unmute yourself or be unmuted. We still can't hear you. Here we go. We gotcha.
Could you hear me? Hi, this is a question for all the women, but especially for Nala. We know each other. We're leaders in the community. And my question is probably a big one, and we probably have to have a continued dialogue. But I also come from Afro-Caribbean ancestry, and sex and intimacy and HIV is like a null conversation. How do we then have a conversation internationally as women, you know, not only trans women, but how much we affirm and we prevent, we celebrate, we eroticize safer sex, because sex in Africa, I'm married to an African man, sex in Africa and HIV is different than it is in the Caribbean, than it is in America. How do we have those conversations as women living with HIV and AIDS, and how do we protect, you know, the context of the conversation that we're equally celebrated with our own cultural norms and values?
That's such a great question. I think what has worked for me is like, I always have different sister circle meetings. So like, say if there's a lingerie party, then we have lingerie, and then the conversation comes up. Say if it's a sipping paint or sipping wine, then those are the conversations. Because like, especially if it's anything adult led and we're talking about dating and relationship or sex, I'm like, oh, well, since we're talking about sex, let's have this conversation about this. What are your thoughts about this? So I can I always like to ask open-ended question. What are your thoughts about, so I can see where they are? And then basically acting like I don't know anything, but then having the teachable moment, like, well, do you actually know this? And these are some resources, because I like to know who I'm sharing spaces with and how they show up when they're not around me. So I will pretend like I don't know something as it pertains to sex. Or like a lot of my friends are lesbian, trans, like all different, like even like one of my communities that I love how Shabazz talks about how the LGBT spaces has been someone affirming for them, but for me it has been, and I'm interfaith, but my my healing space has been with Muslim brothers who knows that I'm trans, who love me just as I am, and it's platonic, like nothing serious. And we have these conversations. And so I think people, we hold people small to the capacity of them learning, but people generally do not want to hurt other people. And if they're coming from a place of love, then they will sit and they will receive it.
Okay. So what my take home, I mean, there's many take homes from this wonderful conversation that you guys have been willing to share with me and also share with the other individuals on the call, on the Zoom rather. It's, you own yourself and you have your strength, and you're telling people they've got to step up, and you, as much as we would want anyone to believe in us as ourselves, to come to us straight, come to us and accept us as we are, as we will accept everyone else as they are. You're telling people that we can make sex positive. You're also saying that we've got to mirror who people are when we're trying to have this conversation and this education. And my biggest take home, Nala, from your conversation at the end is being open to hear other people's stuff. It sounds like being open to hear other people's truth, but also asking that if people are going to deal with any of you, that they also have to be open to hearing your truth. I appreciate the strength that you guys have shown us, the strength that you've demonstrated for other women. I think the language that you've given other women to be able to have these conversations with other people in their lives, and also the permission to say, if you can't come correct, keep it moving. So thank you again very much. I know Ingrid wants to move along. If you have something to add, Ingrid, or to say?
Yeah, just kudos to all of you for speaking your truth. I mean, I've known, everybody in this panel, Nala and I have met recently. I've known Connie since high school. I'm from the South, for people who don't know. I went to high school with Connie. I've known Raven since she was a baby. Raven used to speak at our teen summits when we first started having them 15 years ago. And I remember the kids saying to her, "You don't have HIV. You're not HIV positive." And she would have to say, "Yes, I am." Knowing Waheedah and all the amazing work she's done with the Positive Women's Network and just being a voice for the Muslim women who are living with HIV, and Nala being able to just tell your truth about how do we help to make sure that our sisters with trans experience get the dignity, the respect that they need, but also get the education that's needed to make sure that we're all culturally aware. And then Gina, as always, I thank you for just continuing to being a warrior for women living with HIV and helping us to figure out how do we get women to the end of this epidemic and we don't leave them behind as we think about all the other populations. So kudos again. If everybody could use their little reactions on the bottom and send your reactions out, I think nothing but positive. You all couldn't see all the chats that you were talking, but the same thing, just positive comments in the chat. So I thank you all for a great panel. We're going to ask everybody to stay on. We're going to go to our next part.